TelecomTV, where ICT connects.
Hello, you're watching TelecomTV. My name is Martin Warwick, reporting from the SDN and OpenFlow World Congress 2013 in Bad Homburg in Germany, which is quite a posh little spa town, quite close to Frankfurt. And I'm talking with Chris Liou, who is the Vice President Network Strategy with Infinera. Chris, welcome. I'd like to begin by asking you about the notion of carrier SDN. Sort of multi-provisioning, multi-layer provisioning and that sort of thing. Tell me about Infinera and why you're concentrating on that.
Well, the Infinera is a worldwide leader in providing optical transport systems. And we're deployed a number of carrier networks around the world and form the core of those networks. Now, carrier SDN has become a very interesting topic with our customers because of some of the problems that they're facing today, which includes using different vendors' products at different layers.
Sure.
Normally they would use one vendor for maybe the IP core and then another vendor for the optical transport layer. And these processes for provisioning bandwidth services are very lengthy today. And so what carrier SDN attempts to address is simplifying the provisioning of bandwidth services across these different layers in a multi-vendor environment. And what we were presenting yesterday was a prototype solution that we co-developed along with Energy Scientists Network and with Brocade, demonstrating how carrier SDN can solve the multi-layer provisioning and optimization problems that they're facing.
What has come about as a result of that? Is this an easy process? I mean, I understand it's technically complex, but as far as the user is concerned, is this a straightforward, relatively easy process?
It's actually a fairly complex problem because the carrier networks are very large and they use different vendors even within the same networking layer. And so what we wanted to demonstrate with the concepts of SDN was first, SDN as applied to transport can enable them to more flexibly utilize bandwidth in that layer. Yeah. And B, when you use SDN as a means for centralizing the topology information from both the IP layer and the optical transport layer, you can achieve these difficult tasks of trying to provision services across these different layers that today are very manual and take several weeks in order to accomplish. With SDN, you can help automate that process and thereby reduce some of the operational expenses that carriers are facing. And furthermore, you enable now the opportunity for them to build their own applications that can then automatically re-optimize the network as traffic conditions change in the network.
This leads me on, Chris, obviously and inevitably to the concept and the question of standards. Where do they play into this? In the past, we've seen in network an immensity of proprietary systems, which has made the network even more complex.
Right.
So where are we on the standards front?
That's a very good question. When SDN first started, it was all focused within the data center.
Yes.
And the OpenFlow standard was focused on packet switch systems. Earlier this year, the ONF had started a new working group called the Optical Transport Working Group to specifically start looking at how SDN can be applied towards the lower layers of the network. In the lower layers of the network, we're starting to see new transport systems that converge optics along with integrated switching functions. And what this group is focused on is identifying real-life use cases for SDN as they apply to the transport layer, and then provide some recommendations about standards in order to extend OpenFlow and relevant protocols to support SDN for the transport layer. Additionally, we've seen a new effort within the OIF standards organization to help define the requirements that carriers have on transport SDN. And together, these activities are helping to shape and form some new set of standards to help guide the development by vendors.
Thank you. Almost exactly a year ago, at another one of these events, the NFV white paper first came out. Mm-hmm. I understand that SDN and NFV are different things, but they are very, very complementary. I'd just like to ask you what you have seen over the past 12 months in the SDN field that has changed.
That's a very good question, because when SDN was first talked about last year, it was still in its very early stages. And specifically as SDN applies to transport layer, I think both the vendors as well as the carriers were still exploring the use cases for SDN. And they were looking at different ways of how SDN could help them in the network. The big difference I see this year is that there's actually been some real development in this area with a number of prototypes and demonstrations of how SDN for carriers could actually solve real business problems. An example would be the work that we just did with ESNet along with Brocade that shows a real multi-layer, a multi-vendor network environment and how SDN can help coordinate the provisioning activities between our different systems using open standard APIs, and how that same framework architecture could also be used to develop new interesting applications which could optimize the flow of traffic through these multi-layer networks. That couldn't have been achieved without the SDN framework, because the big value add that SDN provides is a centralized location where I could see the entire global network view and develop new applications very quickly that can take advantage of that global perspective.
What about OSS, which is going to be impacted by this, hopefully for the better, because at the moment, to say it's a mess is to understate it really, but it's a very complex, tangled web. What impact do you think SDN is going to have on it?
That's also a great question, because whenever you introduce new management and control paradigms, you cannot ignore the BSS and OSS perspective. Over time, in the long term, I think SDN can help, because what SDN helps promote is this notion of abstraction. And if we can get the vendor community to adopt abstraction in their interfaces, then that should hopefully make the job of the OSS a little bit simpler. One of the problems that OSS face today is the integration effort required to can integrate with all the different vendor systems and platforms out there and integrate vendor-specific capabilities. If SDN is successful in defining the APIs at the right level of abstraction, then my view is that long-term that should help simplify the OSS problem. But until we get there, there needs to be a migration strategy, which could potentially complicate some of the OSS integration issues in the short term, but hopefully that'll be done with the benefit of the long-term view of simplifying that problem.
Okay, Chris Liou, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
TelecomTV, where ICT connects.